podcast where we ask and answer 4 questions about film. I am one of your hosts, Chris Stashew of the Culture Cast, and I'm joined by the other host of this show,
Ryan Verrill of the Disc Connected.
And ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, if you're listening to this episode, you are either a lover of film or someone who wants to further their knowledge on the thing that Ryan and I enjoy so much, which is cinema and film and everything that is incorporated within that. On this episode of Film Foundations, we're going to be taking a look at an actor. That actor in specifics is Patrick Wilson, and we'll be answering 4 questions about Patrick Wilson. What is the best entry point? What is the deepest cut? What was his or is his biggest contribution to pop culture? And if you're a fan of if you're a fan of Patrick Wilson, what might also be something you could also check out and enjoy? So before we start answering some questions and start diving deeper, Ryan, tell me a little bit about your exposure to Patrick Wilson, who does a lot of singing, for those of you who maybe don't know this, who maybe only know him as an actor from horror movies. Patrick Wilson has done an awful lot of singing in his career, folks.
So Patrick Wilson's first credits, based on IMDb specifically, is all the way back in 2001. But the first one that many of us probably saw him in was 2004's The Phantom of the Opera. That is when I saw him, and then was immediately the next year taken into Whiplash with Hard Candy that he did, which is a really rough role that he did pretty damn well at.
It's a rough movie.
It is a rough movie.
That's one of those movies where it's a hard one to, it's a hard movie, period.
After that, he did some small-ish films. Running with Scissors was another one around that time. He did a couple like Lakeview Terrace. I know quite a few people that watched that. But then the next big one was probably Watchmen, where he played Night Owl. That was his first entry into these franchise films, which became kind of the next 15 years of his life following this. He did some voice roles. He played some smaller roles and like some comedy stuff like that. And then came 2010, where Insidious was the first big hit with Patrick Wilson as the star, and really made him kind of the face of some horror franchises. After he was in that, he did that Gifted Man TV series where he was the star of that one. He was in Prometheus, and then again, 2013, he got another franchise rolling with The Conjuring. Again, some smaller films in the background, followed by Bone Tomahawk. That was another big one for a lot of people. And then kept rolling with his franchise entries that he was doing. And then 2018 comes along, and he stars in Aquaman as King Orm, which a lot of people thought was out of nowhere. But again, kind of followed up Watchmen with that, so that made sense. Did a Stephen King adaptation of In the Tall Grass. He was in Moonfall, which I've still not seen. Heard it's pretty damn bad. He's been in the Aquaman sequel. He's got some other stuff coming up. And then maybe the most relevant recent film is he directed and starred in and sang the closing credits song for Insidious: The Red Door.
Yeah, he was also on, speaking of IPs and being involved with intellectual properties, he was also in, was it the 3rd season of Fargo, I believe?
Yeah.
As second season, as one of the main characters, I believe. So yeah, Patrick Wilson's been all over the place. And like you mentioned, I mean, obviously, early on in his career, especially with Phantom of the Opera, I mean, he was 30 when that movie came out. And I mean, look, he's not cast as the Phantom. I kind of feel like he maybe should have been, given that I think he's obviously he's more musically gifted than Gerard Butler is. I mean, he's nominated for 2 Tony Awards for Oklahoma and The Full Monty on stage. So he has the credibility. I'm not saying Gerard Butler's a bad actor, actually far from it. I think Gerard Butler is a good actor for a certain kind of movie. And I think White House is Down is a pretty good example of that. We could do a whole episode on Gerard Butler, and it would be a variety of things. Patrick Wilson, though, is a weird case because, like you mentioned, I feel like a lot of people know him for, like, one specific thing, like literally one thing, and only one genre. And I'm curious to see, as we delve further into Patrick Wilson's kind of body of work with this episode, where our answers come in at and where our answers are coming from, because yes, you could have one of two answers for almost all these questions, but I don't think we're going to.
It's true. I think that especially for like the best entry point, I think there are going to be some really obvious touch points, and without that, you are just kind of comparing apples to apples because it's going to be a very similar feeling across a few things. Patrick Wilson is one of those people that is great at what he does, but I can definitely see why some of the people that are not like giant Patrick Wilson fans look at him and say he's not an incredible actor. He sort of just plays Patrick Wilson. But to that, I say, you got to have a straight man in lots of these stories. And with stuff like Insidious, it affects him personally. He is somebody that's there as a canvas to have things thrown at him, essentially. And he does well playing that role.
So I think, before we talk about the best entry point, the first thing that you saw him in was Phantom, right?
Yes, it absolutely was.
Okay, same. I mean that, and we were joking before we turned the recorder on because again, I don't dislike the movie. I just don't like the casting. He looks so young in that compared to now, but even now, I mean this gentleman has aged gracefully. As a 50-year-old, he doesn't even look 50, and that's the thing. When I think there's like this there's meme of like someone comparing what Paul Rudd looked like at the same age as Wilford Brimley, and it's like Paul Rudd still effectively looks like Paul Rudd, and Wilford Brimley looked like an 80-year-old man at age 54. And Patrick Wilson is one of those people that like it doesn't look like he's ever aged. He's just kind of grown more into himself, and that's what I love about Patrick Wilson is he's a constant. He always is just kind of doing not the same thing. Like you said, some people would say he's just kind of doing the same thing, but I like him for his ability to just kind of step into a role and make it his own for good and for bad.
Yeah.
I'm very curious to see what our answers are because I think some of mine may surprise you. So that will be where we start. So Ryan, first question, what is the best entry point into the filmography of Patrick Wilson?
Right. So like I said, this is one of those things where I think there's going to be a couple certain touch points, but when you look at what his filmography is and has been, I think to find out if you like Patrick Wilson as an entry point, the best way is by watching The Conjuring. Now, if you would ask me this last week, I may have said Insidious on one day. I may have said Phantom of the Opera one day. I may have said The Watchmen. I may have said Aquaman because he's not awful in that movie. But I do think in the very first Conjuring film, you see every aspect of his acting. You see him start to embrace this straight man, very like period piece horror character that he is in this. And it wasn't until a couple movies later that he sort of started to become this modern horror icon. And with him playing this like franchise building character that he's playing in this full Conjuring universe now, it is somebody that he has embraced. It is somebody that he has brought a life to. It is somebody that with his chemistry with Vera Farmiga, he has developed this ongoing level of like familiarity that people can really watch and learn how his character grows between films. And yeah, the Warrens have their own story and all that other crap with it, of course, but this movie it's just good. Like, it's one of those rare, modern, very mainstream horror movies that is very well made. There's very little bad that I could say about The Conjuring. I don't think it's a perfect movie, but honestly, for a mainstream horror, it's pretty damn close. I'm still very impressed watching this. I saw this one in the theaters. It was one of the first movies I saw after moving to Kansas City, actually. And was immediately taken by the simplicity of some of the horror scenes. And I still go back to it as some of the best that we've seen in the last 15 years.
So I agree with everything you said, obviously. I think the thing that's funny, and it's going to come up in my answer too, and as someone who used to do a spooky, creepy show that you can still find on weirdingwaymedia.com, Scary Stories We Tell, it's still there. And we bring up the Warrens from time to time. The Warrens are a very complex bag to unpack because the real people are involved in a lot of ways with the fake creations on screen.
Yep.
And the characters on screen are so immensely likable because of who plays them. And if they were not played by two of the most charismatic actors, both separately and together with their chemistry, I don't think those movies would work at all. I don't think they would be nearly as good as they are. And I don't think that the third movie, which is objectively the worst one, would still be better than most horror movies that are still being made right now in terms of big budget studio horror movies. That all being said, I'm actually going to go with The Conjuring 2 as my best entry point.
Interesting.
And yes, I understand that it is the sequel and not the original movie, but I would contend that the second movie sets up everything you need to know about the characters in the first 5 minutes of that movie. With the seance in the Amityville house, and you get to see Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga interact. You get to see some stakes immediately with his character and her character. But I think he really shines in the second movie because you get to see a different side of his character, a kind of softer side of his character, and as much as it's kind of a gaggy scene and it's kind of too saccharine for its own good, the scene where he sings Elvis is like oddly charming in a really weird way, and it has no right working as well as it does, and it's a weird aside in a movie about effectively the Enfield haunting. But it totally works, and it works because Patrick Wilson is so fucking charming. He is so charming, and he and Vera Farmiga ground that movie in such a reality that the things that are happening in the second movie are a lot more fantastical than the first movie. Like, way more fantastical. And they're trying to do different things. And I think Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga's ability to ground the second movie in a sense of reality is, for me, more impressive than the first movie, because the first movie in a lot of ways like is a layup. Like, it's such an easy movie to make. And the second movie has my favorite scare in the entire franchise. I think it has the best climax in the entire franchise so far, with the kind of haunted house break-in at the end of the second movie. But the thing is, again, like, everything that Patrick Wilson does in that movie helps humanize it and keep it grounded in reality. And that's what makes him and Vera Farmiga so eminently watchable in those movies, is they take an idea that seems fantastical and they make it approachable and they make it seem real and they give it the stakes because you care about those two characters. And most of the time, they're not even in a physical danger. The people that they're helping are in physical danger, and they are in danger because they're there, not because they would be in danger otherwise. And that kind of disconnect from the narrative, what they're doing gets you to reconnect with it. It makes it, oh, okay, like, I should care about these people because the Warrens care about them, and I care about the Warrens, and therefore they care. And I like that about the second movie, because in the second movie, there's a moment where you see the two characters really having to go to bat for the characters that are being haunted. And Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga, I think, really shine in that scene towards the end of the movie together. It's kind of hokey as it is. But, yeah, I mean, look, I think Ed Warren is going to end up being Patrick Wilson's, like, the role he's remembered for, as far as I'm concerned. And especially, I think, for the both of us as horror movie fans, The Conjuring is a perfect movie. Like, I watch it once every couple months, and I'm always amazed at the amount of mileage they get out of the littlest things in the first movie. And then in the second movie, I still think they get a lot out of a little, especially the scare in the art room, which I think for me, like, that entire scene with the nun through the house is just, I don't know, like, hats off to James Wan, because that still scares me now when I watch it. And I've seen it a million times because I've talked about it before, how much I love that scene in the second movie. But I also love the performances in the second movie because, again, they give them, in the first movie, they're not given much room to grow because they have to be narrowly defined to get through that movie. But in the second movie, we get to see more of what's going on, and we get more stakes. And with more stakes, we get more character work by Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga. So that's my answer. As contrarian as it might sound to go with the sequel over the original, you know.
I don't think you're wrong. I think that these are the two answers. I originally had The Conjuring 2 as a possibility that I was deciding on for this one. My big thing that I went for is I feel like the first one was more of an Ed Warren story, and the second one was more on expanding what the Warrens could do as a whole. And that first one was more of like him him trying to protect his wife through some of those things, and then also just he was advancing that first story. The second one, they were kind of letting the overall terror advance the entire story, but that first one, we got Patrick Wilson basically holding our hand, walking down the hallway, saying, "Look at this," and it worked well. And I think depending on what you want from the movie, I could see either of these being great for almost anybody who's never seen anything from him. But I will say, complete opposite of what you just said. The Conjuring 2 is great for how it humanizes the Warrens. And I feel like that's where the third one got it so wrong. Because I did not like The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It, or whatever the hell it's called. This movie, first off, the CGI is the worst in any of these movies in this, I think, other than maybe some of the stuff in The Nun. But in this Conjuring movie, they are in more danger. Like Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga are in spots where they are technically, like, actually in danger, and I don't care. Something about this movie,
third act of that movie, really,
right? It takes away everything about how they had built up this affinity and this familiarity in the first couple of movies and said, you know what, fuck it, let's just make it. And the hard part, this is kind of a COVID movie, and you can tell, but it came out at a really bad time and didn't fulfill anything that they were setting up beforehand. And just, I did not love this movie. Conjuring 3 was real bad, but I'm glad you went with The Conjuring. And The Conjuring 2 is a great choice. I'm just, this franchise, again, as you already said, it is Patrick Wilson. He is going to be Ed Warren when we remember him in 30 years or whatever. And honestly, Vera Farmiga is probably going to be remembered as Lorraine Warren, but also she's done quite a bit well for her stuff as well. And I'm really happy that they chose these two people. I feel like the chemistry is genuine here.
Yeah, it feels like one of those things where, like I said, the first movie is almost a perfect movie because everybody is cast perfectly.
Right.
And really, it's the leads. Like Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga, like it cannot be overstated how good they are and how much everything else almost doesn't even matter. Like in a lot of ways, the third Conjuring movie, which to your point is, look, I again, as someone who has spent time doing the research about the things that these movies are based on for another show, I have my own quibbles, and the immediate quibble I have is that case is a load of shit to begin with.
Right.
It's not like Enfield and what happened in Connecticut. Those are things that are harder to explain because there was a lot of stuff going on there that seems like an actual haunting. I mean, look, there was a child who was possessed by the devil, maybe. But does the devil then, or the demon, transfer to another person in that room, and then they go and murder someone because of it? That's when we start taking steps into a direction that seems a little iffy for me. So the third movie is on very shaky foundations, speaking of foundations, to begin with. I have always found the premise of the third movie was a mistake. Like, I understand you couldn't do Amityville because people have the rights to that and they don't want to part with them. But guess what? This is a bad idea. This is a bad case to approach because, again, I think it's the case where the Warrens look like ding-dongs for supporting it. It's the case where the ding-dongs. It's the case where the Warrens were used as kind of puppets by the people in the defense to be like, it was look at these demonologists here. They're gonna. It's like, guys, I mean, I appreciate what we're doing here, but at the same time, this idea is not, the demonic case that shocked the world. And it's like, I guess, but at the end of the day, like, the guy went to prison, so there you go. Like, what they tried to do didn't work. He went to jail. The end. But, and that's the thing for me. It's like the third story, there's not even like a question as to what the fuck was going on. Like, mentally disturbed people doing things that mentally disturbed people tend to do, which is not have healthy reactions to things. And one of the unhealthiest reactions is to stab someone to death because of a drunken argument, I think is essentially kind of what they've more or less talked about. So, yeah, the third movie has a lot of problems. Vera Farmiga and Patrick Wilson do their best to salvage a poorly designed movie from the get-go. So,
I agree fully.
The better,
Right. And again, The Conjuring is going to be a big part of all of this, of course. So I don't want to.
Just horror in general, frankly. Like,
Right. I don't want to push too deep down that path, but I'm very eager to hear the differences in responses for the second question. So let's go into it. Chris, what is a good deep cut that may not be the best first film to watch to get an idea of who Patrick Wilson is?
so I don't know if this was your answer. It probably isn't, but it's mine. So if you know me, I've talked about I may have mentioned it a long time ago on an early episode of my show. I have a very strange affinity for the film Smokin' Aces because it's a really dumb movie and it's a really dumb fun movie. And so I'm a fan of Joe Carnahan for whatever reason because of it. And 2014 Stretch with Patrick Wilson is a movie that came out about 4 years too early. If it had come out after John Wick had come out, I think people would be like, oh, there's like a John Wick thing. And
Right.
I think also it's like John Wick and the Transporter. It's kind of in that same vein, but at the same time, like Patrick Wilson is the lead. So it feels like that Mr. Nobody movie with Bob Odenkirk where it's like an unassuming guy is kind of drawn into intrigue and crime. Stretch is a fun movie, directed and written by Joe Carnahan. It stars a bunch of people. It stars Ed Helms, James Badge Daly. I think Jessica Alba's in there for like a minute. She's there for a cup of coffee. But like Stretch is a weird movie and it's a lead. Patrick Wilson's the lead in the movie. He is the titular character. So that for me is my answer. And I have not heard anybody talk about that movie in like forever at all. Like it's kind of one of those movies that Universal released. It went on VOD and there you go.
Beyond that, it is available, as I always talk about physical media, it is available in a Blu-ray from Kino Lorber that I've been recommending people check out for a long time because I really like Stretch.
It's a fun movie, right?
This was on the verge of being my choice, but for some reason, I had a feeling that it was going to be your pick, so I wanted to leave it off. I also feel like it's a little more mainstream than some of the others, so I wanted to go with one that was an interesting look on the comedic side of him, and Stretch does have some of that. It's not like a perfect straight man or anything like that, but oh my gosh, I have to talk about, and funny enough, same year, 2014, we have to discuss his turn in Let's Kill Ward's Wife. Now, first off, this movie, directed by Scott Foley, Scott Foley.
He's the brother-in-law of Patrick Wilson.
Surprised the hell out of me that he directed this. I didn't even realize that till later. But the big thing, this is Scott Foley, Donald Faison from Scrubs, and a couple other individuals, and then Patrick Wilson. We got those big names in this. And there is this character, Ward's wife, of course, as you can tell by the name, that everybody just loathes. They think she's insufferable. They absolutely hate being around her. She ruins every moment. And then there is this thing where something happens and she dies. And there's this random black comedy way of trying to fix the fact that, of course, there's this group of friends that kind of hated this person who happened to die. Now, how do we fix that and have none of us get in trouble? And the way that he handles comedy here is excellent. It takes every aspect of his acting that we've seen in Aquaman. We've seen it in The Conjuring. We've seen it in, some aspects of it in things like The Watchmen. And this movie feels like an interesting culmination of that period of his career where he was making smaller movies while waiting on these other big franchise movies to come out. And something about this, it's dark, so it does feel like it has a couple of the horror tinges, even though it's not a scary movie in any way. But it's got some of those storylines. It's got really great comedy. The beats between the actors work really well together. And because it's Scott Foley and he knows Patrick Wilson so personally, the whole thing just has this really interesting, close-knit chemistry to it that works very, very well. But also, hardly anybody has seen this thing. So I wanted to throw it out there as a deep cut because this movie is great and underrated and unsung and something that, it deserves better than being forgotten about amongst all of his horror features that were coming out during this time. And that's not to say that the horror tinges aren't good, because those movies are all great. But this movie, well done, absolutely deserves a look. And if you are already into Patrick Wilson and you've never seen this one, seek it out. Completely worth it.
Kansas City's own Scott Foley.
Kansas City's own.
I love Scott Foley. He hasn't done enough movies. I mean, look, he's in, I
Yeah.
think, objectively, we talked about it already. I think he's in objectively the worst Scream movie.
Absolutely.
Which is a shame because he's good. We would probably never do an episode on Scott Foley because he hasn't been in enough things,
Right.
at least cinematically. But dear God, he's been in a lot of TV.
Tons of TV.
Scandal, Felicity, Scandal. I mean, Jesus Christ. He's in 100 episodes of Scandal. So, like,
Jesus.
yeah. And Scandal's actually, you know what? I've watched a fair amount of it, and I can comment that it's actually not a bad show. I understand what it looks like from the outside is maybe something people wouldn't be into, but Scott Foley's great. I love Scott Foley. And yeah, it's just a shame he's Roman Bridger in the worst Scream movie.
Yeah.
Of the original Scream movies, he's in the worst one for sure. Yeah, I have to check it out. I've never seen that movie, but as I was looking through his filmography, I was like, this is one that definitely jumps out at me as one worth checking out.
Well, and I used the word underrated a moment ago, and I use that on purpose because I know a lot of people, they'll claim a movie is underrated when what they mean is it's underseen and very few people have seen it. This movie is both. Most people have never seen this, but for those that have, it is rated lower than you will probably think it should be after you watch it. This movie is actually really good, and again, pay attention to the chemistry because people's actual wives are a part of this. People's, the people are related while making this, and it just seems like a close family affair type of movie. Glad it's here. Glad it's made. Glad people can check it out. And again, Patrick Wilson, really great in this, and plays primarily like the big name. He gets most of the screen time in this.
Which is, I mean, again, that's as someone who enjoys him as an actor, that would be the reason I would watch it. Because I'm not a Scrubs guy. Though I have friends that swear up and down it's the funniest show ever made.
I adore Scrubs.
Never seen a singular episode.
It's really good. I know Zach Braff is insufferable in every other aspect of life, but he is really great in this movie.
Correct.
And yeah, I completely understand that. And it's not even him. Like, Katherine Heigl's also in it, so you get a double dose. And yeah.
What's wrong with Katherine Heigl?
Supposedly terrible to work with.
Yeah, but at the same time, I think the trains come back around on Katherine Heigl. I think it's now looked at as she stood up for herself. I think it's what it is.
Oh, okay, it could be.
Yeah. So I don't know. I'm going to ask you this, and we can edit this out. Are we going to talk about Watchmen in the next question, or do we want to have an aside about Watchmen?
I mean,
because I want to talk about Watchmen at some point because there's things that need to be said.
If you think that's his biggest impact on pop culture, you can bring it up for the next one.
I don't, which is why
I don't either. So maybe right now, just say. Okay. So I wanted to talk about this before we get to the third one.
That's what I was getting at. Because, like I said, I didn't want to get past it and then feel like we've missed it.
Right.
So I know we've talked here about what we find to be Patrick Wilson's kind of lesser known role or the deeper cut, but I think just to take a moment here. I would say, and I would say before Conjuring and before Insidious, he was known for one thing, right? Which was his turn as Night Owl 2 in Watchmen, which, look, Zack Snyder and his constant need to make another version of a movie or have somebody else release the movie version of a movie. That's like... We were talking about this shit with Watchmen in 2009, and now I had to hear about it again with the Snyder cut. Again, like, fuck off, okay? Look, I will even sit here and tell you Justice League Snyder cut is better than the original. But that's like saying a calcified dog turd is better than a dog turd. It's the same thing. It's just, okay, yeah, it's a harder turd, so there's a squish when you pick it up. Sure.
May I remind you, we're doing that again with Rebel Moon.
Right, it's the same bullshit with Zack Snyder. Like, give it a fucking rest. You know what? Like, as much as Zack Snyder has gone through some shit, and as much as Justice League is a movie where he went through some shit, and I get it. Watchmen, he wasn't going through shit, and Watchmen's terrible. It is one of those movies where I saw it in college, and I thought, boy, the graphic novel was really not your speed, huh? And I still think that when I watch it. It's a fun movie, but it is a bad adaptation of something that is an important graphic novel. And Patrick Wilson is miscast in that movie. he's miscast. I'll say it. I don't think he adds or detracts. I think he's just not the right person for the role. He's supposed to be like a 40-year-old overweight guy. Come on. Like that was like, that's not the person you cast for that.
Right.
Which is a shame because Patrick Wilson is one of an amazing group of actors in that movie. Fucking Jeffrey Dean Morgan, Jackie Earle Haley, Carla Gugino, Jesus Christ. And you couldn't salvage it, Zack Snyder.
It keeps coming around on him.
I know. And that's the thing. I don't want to beat up on Zack Snyder, but it's kind of like his own doing. This is like a self-fulfilling prophecy with him. How many more times can this guy make movies that people are like, I want to see the Snyder cut? And it's like, okay, like you have this like weird group of fans on the internet who are just very militant. And I don't like, are these movies that important to these people? I guess.
Well, and beyond that, what I've laughed at the last few times that this has come up for him is the movies are getting pretty like mid reviews, and everybody's saying, give us the Snyder cut. I want 47 more minutes of this. I'm like, well, do you? Why do we want so much more of this that's only okay?
Because the people that like it don't think it's just okay. They think it's the height of cinema. I literally had conversations with people about how amazing Batman versus Superman was and how I just didn't get it. And I was like, oh yeah, it's me that doesn't get it. You're right. You can have this one. Like, I'm not going to argue with that person because that's not a hill that I'm worth spilling blood on. But if you want to spill blood for the Batman versus Superman hill,
right?
It hasn't aged well that you did. So,
right.
You know, that's the thing. I'm not saying that, like, retroactively people should be ashamed for supporting things that get shit canned because it goes nowhere. But those directors did not make some of these movies in good faith, and Zack Snyder is one of them. And his inability to understand the comic book genre started with Watchmen and got worse when they turned the reins over to actual things that are more well-known than Watchmen. That's the thing. Like, Watchmen was well-known to the comic book nerds, but then in like 07, 08, all the people who had never heard of it before were inundated with Watchmen stuff. And it's like, oh, okay. Like, are those people that are seeing the trailer going to go pick up the graphic novel? I don't know. Probably not. That's a shame. But everybody knows Batman and Superman. And then he taints those characters.
Right.
Like, Watchmen's one thing. I get it. Like, Alan Moore said the movie was an abortion to begin with, but he's always going to say that. But to look at that movie and say, now this is the guy we want with the real superheroes, just a flummoxing idea to me.
Gotta love our tangents on this show. Yeah, Zack Snyder is a piece of work. I will say it like that.
He is. And again, like, I don't know if it's him or if it's the people that like his movies. And right. I can't figure out, because that's the thing. Like, when we talk about someone like a Zack Snyder, I immediately think about someone like a Michael Bay, who had a bunch of great actors in his movies and couldn't do anything with them because, again, it's you that's the problem, not the actors. It's your kind of inability to direct. It's more just like throw shit on the screen and I hope somebody finds this cool looking at you, 300. But again, that works when no one has any expectations. But when people have expectations of how you're going to handle things and you just start doing whatever the hell you want,
right,
it becomes a problem. And when you have Superman breaking people's necks in your first movie, yo, what? It's, yeah. And again, like, you had Patrick Wilson in your movie and you didn't do anything with him other than have a really awkward and kind of laughable sex scene with Malin Akerman, which I don't know if you remember that sex scene from Watchmen, but there is a part where the owl ship is timed with him ejaculating and it ejaculates fire. Something like that. Do you remember what I'm talking? You know what I'm talking about, right?
Barely. I don't think I've seen this since it came out.
Oh, good. Keep it.
And I have no desire to see it again.
Yeah. It's 3 hours long too, on top of everything else. Like,
Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the other thing. Zack Snyder is best in small doses, like 300, not 3 hour treks through the magic of cinema. It's like,
I will say, and I don't want to start another tangent on top of this tangent. However, I'll defend Michael Bay's choices on some of these things. I really like
Michael Bay's. Oh, I haven't seen it yet, but I know
Ambulance is amazing.
I've heard it's like wildly entertaining in a way it has no right being.
Incredibly entertaining.
That's the thing. You know what? I would even go as far to close this tangent off doubly. Michael Bay's films are entertaining, but they're stupid. Zack Snyder's
Oh
films
yeah,
are stupid and rarely are entertaining because they're just constantly masturbatory visually, and you can't constantly masturbate visually if you're not going to give us anything else. Michael Bay, at least, like, there are some memorable characters in some of his movies, and Michael Bay, I think, has actually tried. I mean, Pain
right.
and Gain is a much better movie than I think it has any right to be, and that's
Agreed.
a Michael Bay movie. I'm not sure I would give a single compliment to anything Zack Snyder has made, because the only thing that he's made that I like, he didn't even write it. You know who did? James Gunn. What a surprise. So that's my point. Like, Michael Bay, at least, like, there are some movies that'll be like, yeah, I enjoy that. I enjoy Armageddon. You know, like, it's a fucking dumb movie, but I enjoy it for the cast, because the cast is funny. There's no Zack Snyder movies where the cast is funny. There's no Zack Snyder movie where the cast is doing anything other than just being kind of cringy. So, I know, roast me on the internet, Zack Snyder fans. You know where to find me.
Zack Snyder, if you want to email us, let us know. I'll give you the email.
I would love to talk to Zack Snyder and ask him why he makes some of the decisions that he makes constantly. Like, why use slow-mo constantly? What is the point? I want to know, like, at some point there must be a singular reason why these decisions are being made, and I want to know why. Because you can't keep doing it without having a reason that must motivate you to keep including it. Because everybody talks about it every time they review his movies, is the constant overuse of slow-mo. It's like, does he not read that? Does he not see that? Does it not bother him? If it doesn't, why doesn't it? Because he's making it a decision intentionally. Why?
Last thing I'll say on Zack Snyder, I will defend his Dawn of the Dead. I think he has an incredible opening in that movie for sure.
Yeah, but that's because James Gunn wrote it that way.
Okay.
6 doesn't have the other. I mean, it's half and half. I will concede the beginning of that movie is great, but it's like the first 5 minutes. There's another hour and a half connected to that movie that's okay.
Well, even then, I don't think it's terrible either way.
Zombie baby. Zombie baby.
So what is the third answer for Zack Snyder, I guess? I'm just kidding. Let's go back to Patrick Wilson, because that's where this all originated from. And honestly, yeah, there had to be some look at Watchmen, because honestly, at the time, it was a phenomenon. It has been sort of forgotten, thankfully. I'm not shocked by that in any way. And honestly, most of Zack Snyder's stuff is like that. It hits really hard and then goes away. But Patrick Wilson was not a major part in it, so that's why I don't think he was ever going to be close to this being the answer for the third question here. So now it's time to discuss that third question, which on this show, our third question is always, what of our category had the biggest impact on pop culture? And for the category Patrick Wilson, I personally, I think there's only one option here to say, but I'm just very curious to see what you're going to say as well. So go right ahead.
My answer would be him being what I would classify to be one of the first, if not the first, Scream King, which is the male equivalent to Scream Queen. When I think of horror movies in the 10s, I think of one actor in them, and it's Patrick Wilson. And what's funny is, if you sit and think about the 80s, the height of the horror movie, right? Or at least a specific kind of horror movie, the slasher, right? Final girls were the thing. And then in the 90s, we kind of transitioned away from slashers specifically, but more sending up slashers. So we have a Neve Campbell, a Sidney Prescott in Scream, bringing up a previous episode that we've done. And then I think once we hit like the 2010s, people start realizing that, oh, it doesn't necessarily have to just be gender specific. It can be anybody in these movies that the movie's kind of tailored to. Yep. And for whatever reason, Patrick Wilson kind of becomes, from 2010 on, a Scream King, which I don't know if that's a term anybody wants to use. But for me, it's, if Scream Queen is a thing, then there's got to be an equivalent for the male actor in these movies. And that, for me, is it. Patrick Wilson becomes kind of the face of horror as a male lead from 2010 up until now, technically, still. I mean, we're waiting for the fourth Conjuring movie to come out. Conjuring: The Last Rites, which is supposedly going to conclude the franchise. I think that's my answer, is he becomes the face of horror as a Scream King, if not the first one ever. And I'll say it here. If someone else has already said it, then we agree. that's where I'm coming from. He makes a case for there needing to be a new term coined for men in horror movies who are there in every movie, similarly to the way the female characters have been treated by the horror genre fans since like the 80s.
So, funny enough, my answer for this that I wrote down, reading it word for word, says Patrick Wilson is the best final girl that we've had in the last 15 years.
Yeah, you're right there with me. Like, yeah, you get it. That's like the only answer.
Yeah, I think this is the only thing. And honestly, I think it's an important thing to point out because primarily before, the way that we looked at people that are ending up alive at the end of horror franchises were female. They were somebody that had been exploited in certain ways. Many of them are, clothes barely clinging to them. They were looked at as, somebody that was, resilient at best.
Chaste even sometimes.
Yeah, unfortunately. And Patrick Wilson is like I don't want to say the opposite of that or say he's coming in as like a male savior or anything here, but they're just kind of letting him be a dude at the end of these movies. He's not like with his shirt hanging off of him. He's not like a overly competent scientist that fought his way out of this. He's just sort of a dude that's alive. And the way that he brings like this gravitas to all of these performances, you kind of have to fight hard to not like him. He's great at what he does. He's kept mainstream horror alive. What could possibly be looked at as bad as what he's doing?
Yeah, I have no idea. Like Insidious 1, 2, and 3, and then the movie that he fucking directed. I mean, that in and of itself kind of speaks volumes to his kind of notoriety and level within the industry. Like, like they gave him his own movie of the franchise that he kind of helped create as a thing that people should be invested in. I mean, he's the main character. Him and Ty Simpson, is that the actor's name? The young kid, right? He's like the child in the first movie, and now he's like a goddamn adult in the new one because it's been that long,
right?
Which is still crazy to me that Insidious came out a year after Watchmen,
right?
14 years ago now. Yeah, and that's the thing. Like Insidious, if Conjuring had never come out, this would still be our answer.
Yeah,
because of Insidious. Because I genuinely believe, and we really haven't talked about Insidious a whole lot, I think that his kind of contribution to horror is, Final Girl, Scream King, whatever the hell you want to call it. But honest to God, like he really is just like one of the few male actors in horror who comes back. Like, it's such a weird thing to think about, but it's a thing that like kind of is a thing now that we have to think about because they still haven't really invested in doing it. Like, it's still not a thing. Like, I don't know. It's so weird. Horror really has been about the final girls. And, like, that final guy thing has never kind of been a thing. It's kind of odd.
Yeah. I mean, it's happened in singular films, but it's never been somebody that will catch on and do it in different franchises like this. And that did happen on the female side. Like the biggest example is probably Jamie Lee Curtis. I mean, you got this, and then she did The Fog. She did Terror Train. She did a handful around that time. And it was so bad for her that she didn't want to be typecast. Right. So she started actively turning down those projects. And now, I mean, yeah, he is carrying the torch for modern mainstream horror in a way that no one else has been doing, in front of the camera. There's plenty of people behind the camera that are doing it. Like Flanagan is probably somebody that you could say is doing it in terms of directing. But man, he has been great in all of his performances here. He has been somebody that is advocating for it. He's happy with it. He is, somebody that's not ashamed to do horror. He is just
Which
great.
Is amazing, by the way. Like, even though it's 2024, like, can we stop with the genre hate? Like, come on. Like, I know that horror movies never get nominated for anything other than their own awards. Yuck, yuck, yuck. I get it. But, like, that's a shame because that just means the industry will continue to look down on these things for no reason, and it continues to make the industry money. Like, I'm not saying movies like Tar don't make the industry money, but Insidious does. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like, The Conjuring makes hands over fist money for the industry. So it's always a shame to me because there are always amazing performances in genre films that get overlooked just because they're a genre film. And it's like, that's horse shit. I hate that. It's not a way of having a honest and adult conversation about film in 2024, because some of the best performances in movies that I love are not serious movies by any stretch of the imagination. And I genuinely believe Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga are two of the perfectly best cast people on the planet in The Conjuring. And like I couldn't see anybody else playing those roles. That's how good they are. If you showed me two other people casting that role, I'd be like, it's not Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga, so I'm not interested. Don't show me a prequel movie, please. Don't, you know what I mean? If you're gonna show them early in life, just have them like digitally de-aged. That's how good they are in those roles, and that's how good Patrick Wilson is as a horror actor and as an actor in general. And we didn't even really mention it, but he's amazing in another horror movie, Bone Tomahawk, which is a horror movie. I mean, completely different kind of horror movie.
Horror Western.
A horror movie nonetheless. And he's great anytime he shows up in all of the Conjuring movies as well. He's the best part of Annabelle Comes Home. I was so happy to see him at the end of the new Nun movie. Like, show me Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga and don't give me anything else. Because nothing else really matters in the Conjuring universe other than the two of them, which is why they keep showing up, which is why they keep making those movies, which is why the fourth movie won't be the last one. Because these movies are too good, and as long as they continue to show up and say yes, I genuinely believe they'll keep making these movies because of Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga and nobody else. The Curse of La Llorona and all that bullshit aside, none of that exists without Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga being as talented as they are. And again, we're talking about Patrick Wilson here, so half of the credit goes to him, if not 100% of the credit in terms of the male leads in the movies, because he's the male lead in the second movie. Ron Livingston is there in the first movie a little bit, but he's the male lead in the first movie too, and he's the male lead in the third movie. And that's not a thing that happens. Like you said, it's just not a thing that happens in horror. It tends to not be.
Well, and with Patrick Wilson, we did mention, Bone Tomahawk is great, and I could talk about Tomahawk for the next hour and a half probably because I adore that movie. But we did skirt by it earlier. I really want to mention this all started super early with Hard Candy. Honestly, it is an awkward story, and it is kind of cringe in some moments, just thinking about how there's this young individual trying to bait somebody into a really terrible situation and then punish them for it. But Elliot Page and Patrick Wilson are basically the only two people in this movie. Even, yes, there's a couple other people that show up on screen very momentarily, but they carry this film, and directed very well by David Slade. Beyond that, the movie is harrowing, and the only reason you believe this movie is because of the performances from both of the two leads, including Patrick Wilson's incredible emoting and responding to everything in this movie, which up through this point, you didn't even have the proof that he could act like this. And he is absolutely stunning in Hard Candy. This movie is one, I saw it very soon after Phantom of the Opera, and I loved this movie. And this is the one that I clung on to for him for years until The Conjuring until Insidious came along. And it was, it's great. And honestly, we probably should mention the Insidious franchise a little bit more, because that also feels very similar to the Conjuring franchise, because once again, it's him and an attractive female and Rose Byrne that's done in a way there's hauntings, there's young kids involved, and it feels very similar. But man, he just delivers this very authentic performance to a story that in the hands of many other less capable actors would feel so much more hokey, and it just feels alluring. It feels provocative. It feels like something that I can see why people are scared by these films. They're just so well made.
And what's ultimately the funniest thing about all of this is I think that Patrick Wilson, in a lot of ways, his best work has come when working with James Wan, of all people, because we haven't even mentioned Aquaman. And look, I think there's a universe where those movies are super successful and they saved the DCEU and blah, 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 all that stuff that they probably wish had happened that didn't. I watched Lost Kingdom only because Patrick Wilson was in it, and I had heard that it was like Jason Momoa and Patrick Wilson kind of buddy copping it up. It is that.
Well, now I'm going to have to watch it.
It is 100% that. And that's the sad thing is it's like it's kind of a fun movie when they're on screen. When everybody else is on screen, it's fine. But Patrick Wilson and Jason Momoa as brothers who are now having to be reluctant partners to save Atlantis or whatever the hell it's. I don't remember. Like I said, I've given so little shits about Aquaman that I couldn't tell you if it's Atlantis. I'm assuming it is. They're so good that like that carries a otherwise kind of uninspired movie to a point where I would suggest anyone who likes Patrick Wilson watch it because he and Momoa are really fun together. Unfortunately for you, Ryan. Now you have to watch.
Unfortunately. I was just waiting on bated breath to be able to make the joke that the box office for this one shit the bed before it was even released. That was an Amber Heard joke, by the way.
She's probably not in it a whole lot. Oh, right. She's not in it a whole lot. Yeah, I mean, look, Patrick Wilson's really great. And yeah, his work with James Wan, again, like Conjuring, Insidious, like, yeah, like James Wan and Patrick Wilson seem to be made for each other in a lot of ways. So I look forward to seeing how they continue to work together, them two specifically as well. So.
Now we are on, I believe, to our final question. And this one, we are very, very interesting answers could be given here, but we're looking for somebody that if you were a fan of another actor, who would you say that you would go into Patrick Wilson, having seen none of his work, and go, you know what? I would probably like Patrick Wilson because I like this other actor. Who is that for you, Chris?
I honestly I'm still struggling to find an answer here. I don't know. Like there haven't been a lot of actors who have been so able to navigate. Because again, that's the thing about Patrick Wilson. Patrick Wilson he started on stage as a Broadway actor, transitioned to film, but within film, he's still been able to do the Broadway thing, which like there aren't a lot of people that I would compare him to. I mean, there are contemporaries like a Jonathan Groff who kind of has been able to do the same thing, kind of move out of Broadway into film and then kind of still do the Broadway thing in film. Like Patrick Wilson, it might surprise some people to learn that he sings a lot. Like he's, again, Broadway, but that's where he made his bones. So, yeah, that's the thing. Like there aren't a lot of these like double, triple threats that are as high profile as Patrick Wilson, because again, like Patrick Wilson is like the lead in horror franchises, and Jonathan Groff is the lead in Disney stuff. So I guess it's very similar. But
I mean, Jonathan Groff just did a genre film last year. M. Night Shyamalan.
Oh right, God, yeah, sure.
Did you see that one?
Yeah, I did. I forgot that he was in it. To be perfectly honest,
he was really good in it too.
Yeah, I know. That's my point.
He wasn't Dave Bautista, but he was really good in it.
Nobody is, other than Dave Bautista. I would say someone like a Jonathan Groff, which is a very contemporary comparison, and maybe it's not even a very good one. But again, I'm leaning more on the idea of what Patrick Wilson has kind of been able to do in his career. And Jonathan Groff has been able to do similar things. And again, like you mentioned, Jonathan Groff is now kind of making waves into more genre film. And I wonder if that will be a continued thing. Because like you said, Knock at the Cabin it's a horror movie.
Yeah.
It's a lot of things. It's an M. Night Shyamalan movie is what it is.
Very much so.
Good luck quantifying it. But that would be my answer. What about you?
So I chose somebody for this one that I think is hilarious because there's no way that you could know this actor without knowing Patrick Wilson, literally because they're in multiple films together, but also because they've just been in the exact same circles. And I think the answer here is somebody that wishes they were Patrick Wilson. And I'm going to go with Lee Wanell.
What the fuck, dude?
Because listen, the reason I'm choosing this is because he's done a lot of the same things, smaller genre films moving into larger genre films. But beyond that, now they're both on the edge of literally breaking into directing horror very well together. Lee Wanell directed probably the superior film with The Invisible Man. Obviously, I think he directed the hell out of that movie.
It's a great movie.
He's not been known as an incredible actor, obviously, but I think that he is on a track to be in a very similar position as Patrick Wilson. The other one, go ahead.
I actually like Lee Wanell in the acting roles I've seen him in. I find
I do too.
in Insidious he kind of runs away with it. Him and I forget the other gentleman who play.
Yeah.
I always, and this is terrible, I always get Insidious and Conjuring confused as to which one is the one that has Lee Wanell in front of the camera, because there's essentially similar characters in the Conjuring to the Insidious.
Kinda.
Almost feels like proto Conjuring. It's like, how can we do the Conjuring but without the Warrens? Right.
And the Warrens are just an old lady.
Yeah, Lin Shaye, who, I mean, in a lot of ways, like in a universe where there's no Conjuring movies, I still low-key love Lin Shaye and Insidious, so.
Yeah. I also wanted to throw out there somebody that is attractive. He is from genre films. He is somebody that probably should be a bigger actor than he is right now. I'm going to throw out there as maybe one of the next up-and-coming horror kings that we could have. Logan Marshall Green.
Ooh,
I've liked him in most things. I think he's incredible in Upgrade. He was great in The Invitation. He is somebody that could do some powerhouse roles like Patrick Wilson has had. So those are my two that I think are, if you're fans of those or familiar with their work and somehow you've never seen Patrick Wilson, which I get. Like, a lot of people saw Lee Wanell and Saw, and maybe that was, you're done. At that point, maybe you never saw any Patrick Wilson, although that's not likely. But I think both of those are fun choices, and Logan Marshall Green deserves more work, and I hope that he turns in some roles that gets him some big screen time like Patrick Wilson has gotten.
You didn't mention the fact that they were co-stars in 2012's Prometheus. They're not co-stars at all, but you know. Patrick Wilson's involvement in Prometheus is literally a cup of coffee on set. Like,
right.
We're gonna go out to like the woods outside of Encino. We're gonna film for a couple days with Patrick Wilson. Then we'll just cut it into like 5 seconds of footage. And blink and you miss Patrick Wilson in Prometheus. Logan Marshall Green's an interesting choice. I like him a lot.
I do too.
Yeah, he's. Do you remember? This is gonna be such a weird tangent. Do you remember the TV show Traveler? With Logan Marshall Green and Matt Bomer and Aaron Stanford. They were the 3 leads. And it was like Matt Bomer was like a secret terrorist, and Logan Marshall Green and Aaron Stanford play his friends that get like drawn into this web of intrigue because Matt Bomer isn't who they thought he was or something. Or no, is it Aaron Stan? I don't remember. But there's the 3 of them, and one of them is not who they said, and the other 2 I get like drawn into this web. But Logan Marshall Green is in it, and he's really good. And that was like one of the first things I had seen him in because it was like 2007. So he's like very much like a baby-faced Logan Marshall Green. He's great. I don't think we could do an episode on him, though. I don't think he's had
No, he's not done enough
yet.
Big, yeah. I mean, he's really only been the star of Upgrade and then kind of The Invitation, but not enough really to get that sort of let's focus on him and have a debate on which ones we're picking type of conversation.
Yeah.
Well, that's it for our dear friend Patrick Wilson. Any other films from his career that you want to talk about?
I'm excited for whatever comes next for The Conjuring. I mean, that for me is kind of what I'm excited for Patrick Wilson, is to see the quote conclusion, unquote, of The Conjuring verse. Maybe they'll do the thing the MCU never did, which is actually end it and give us a nice little coda at the end and a resolve to the story they've been setting up this whole time. That for me is Patrick Wilson is Ed Warren. Period.
Right.
Like that's kind of the big takeaway for me for this episode is, as much as we may have tried not to talk about it, as much as we maybe thought we won't talk about it a lot, you can't avoid it. It's unavoidable. And that's how good he is in that role. So yeah, for me, I'm excited for whatever comes next in the Conjuring verse, because if he and Vera Farmiga are in it, it'll at least be watchable. What about you?
I agree. I would love to see what he has coming next. I'm also very curious to see if how him being in 2 Aquaman films jolts the next era of his career, because obviously he's probably still going to do some genre films. I mean, he just directed the Insidious movie. I wouldn't be surprised if he started directing more and more. But if he comes into larger films acting, Is he going to do more franchise films? Are they going to have him star in action films? Is he going to be somebody that is the lead in a romantic comedy? Like, he has the chops to do all of those things. And the interesting thing here is what choice does he make next? And after what he's done for the last like 10 or 12 years, I kind of feel like he's getting to the point where he can just pick and choose what direction does he want his career to take moving forward, and dying to figure out what he chooses.
Yeah. There's not going to be an Aquaman 3, but hey, there'll be a Conjuring 4 at least.
Can't wait.
Are you wanting me to end it?
I don't know. I'm just seeing if we want to talk about anything else.
No, I got nothing else.
Cool.
This would have been where we would have talked about Watchmen if we hadn't already run it into the ground, beaten it to death with a baseball bat.
All right. I think that is enough on Patrick Wilson. Eager to have our next episode come out to all of your ear holes. And Chris, what do you got going on? Anything you want to share with everybody? Where to find you?
Just find me over at weirdingwaymedia.com, which, is the place where everything that I work on, including this show, can be found. So, weirdingwaymedia.com. What about you, Ryan?
Everywhere under the Disconnected and Someone's Favorite Productions. Reach out. We are both eager to make new friends and discuss these things with you. If you got a different answer for Patrick Wilson or just want to talk about it, we are here to have that conversation. Thank you all for listening, and we will see you on the next one.